Hello everyone, Redbeard here back at it again, and today we're going to finish the Greenskins series by talking about MISSIN units, lords and heroes, and the Black Gobbo character. Just basically cleaning up everything I haven't talked about in this series yet. So, for the MISSIN units, we're going to first start by talking about the MISSIN generic lords and heroes. So as you see in this image, everything that's checked with a green check mark is already in game. Everything that isn't is not. So there's tons of variants that we're missing from the Greenskins, and the DLC or FLC that comes in Warhammer 3 needs to kind of primarily focus on trying to get in as many variants as possible. Do I expect all these variants? No. What I do expect as the bare minimum is one Lord and one hero option for each of the 6 Greenskin subraces, being Goblins, Night Goblins, Forest Goblins, Orcs, Savage Orcs, and Black Orcs. My top 5 to fill that out are as follows: a Black Orc War Boss, a Savage Orc Great Shaman, a Forest Goblin Great Shaman, a Forest Goblin Big Boss, and a Savage Orc Big Boss. I've chosen these as my top 5 not only because they give us one Lord and one hero option for all of the Greenskin subraces, but also because it gives us the best variety as far as weapons, gears, mounts, and Lords of Magic. So we already have the lore of Little Wa with the Goblin Great Shaman, but with the Savage Orc Great Shaman we would finally get a caster of the Big Wa as a Lord option for the Greenskins. Now the Forest Goblin Great Shaman, as we talked about in my last video, may have a unique lore called the Lore of Spiders. So that would give us 3 different lores in our Lord options, which I think is really, really good. That's my favorite part about these choices. Then the Black Orc War Boss would give us more of a different weapon set. He would also have a boar mount and maybe a boar chariot mount like the Orc War Boss, but would have either great weapons or maybe even dual weapons as the weapon set instead of axe and shield as the Orc War Boss does. For our hero options, we have a Goblin Big Boss already, who is our armored goblin. I kind of think he should lose the spider mount, same with the Goblin Great Shaman, and that should be a Forest Goblin specific thing. But I think, at least for the Great Shaman, that ship has already sailed because the Catchweb Spider Shrine was FLC. But for the Goblin Big Boss, I think he should lose the spider mount. Otherwise, he's doing pretty good with the Wolf and Wolf Chariot mounts. For the Night Goblin Shaman, I think he really falls behind all these other characters because he has no mount. I think just give him a regular squig mount so he gets a little more mobile, and then he's good. For which, on that same note, the Night Goblin War Boss has a armored squig mount. I think it would be really cool if the Night Goblin War Boss got either a Squig Gobba or Colossal Squig mount. The Squig Gobba would give us a Lord who has basically an artillery option, a mobile artillery option, and the Colossal Squig gives us a nice big another single entity monster similar to the Ragnarok Spider, but faster and but a bit squishier as well. But the Night Goblin Shaman is pretty good, otherwise just give him a squig mount. The Forest Goblin Big Boss would give us a possible ranged variant in having either a bow or javelin, and then would give us the Giant Spider and Gigantic Spider mount, and only the Forest Goblin Great Shaman would get the Ragnarok Spider mount. The Orc Shaman we already have, so that, boom, we already have the casters of the lore of Little Wa and the lore of Big Wa in heroes, and maybe only Snagless faction has a hero that can cast the lore of spiders. Maybe that's unique. And then the Savage Orc Big Boss, like, we already have the Black Orc Big Boss, big armored guy that has the boar mount. Now the Savage Orc would be most interesting because of his mounts. The Black Orc Big Boss has shield and axe. The Savage Orc might have dual weapons to be a bit more anti-infantry based. But for his mounts, he would have the boar, but he would also, hopefully, have a Wyvern mount. So we've seen with mods, we've seen at over a dozen mods in Warhammer 1, 2, and 3 that have had Wyvern riders. Now maybe we could add that as a legendary unit, let's say for Gorfang or maybe Azhag. That's kind of like the Knights of Torgaval. Or we could kind of have this option to get Wyverns in our regular armies rather than just WA units through Savage Orc Big Bosses. This would really make that hero stand out too, because if you could possibly build a Doom stack of these Savage Orc Big Bosses on Wyvern mounts, and I think that would be really, really interesting. But yeah, that kind of covers all my ideas as far as why these would be the top 5. Now, could we just get all the variants? Maybe. I mean, I would certainly love that, but I doubt it. I think just asking for these 5 variants and really do these variants well and, clean up the existing variants to match, and I think that's plenty fine for me. Now, the Greenskin roster is in a really good place already. It's just missing weapon variants mostly. As far as new units, the big part that feels like it's missing is SQUIGS. So, Mangler SQUIGS are basically 2 SQUIGS attached to a chain, and they revolve around each other, kind of like the Goblin fanatics when they get their spinny lunan on. They are the same size as regular SQUIGS, but the unit would have half the entities, but that's because it's 2 SQUIGS attached to their one entity with 2 SQUIGS. So this unit would probably be a tier above the Squig Hopper, so tier 4, I believe. And they would have a lot more splash damage. So like the Night Goblin's Fanatic ability, think of that in a cavalry. That isn't just an ability, that's what the unit does. Now this would really probably be hard to animate, so out of all the SQUIGs, I think this is the least likely to show up, but if it did, I think people would go nuts. Now, the Squig Gobba is my personal favorite. So it is a mobile artillery piece, kind of like the ancient salamander, but with the Super Squigs explosion. Maybe a lesser version of that explosion, though, to be fair, because we can't just be wiping out units. It should have similar damage to the ancient salamander, but it's more focused on explosive and possibly poison damage. So having that in the Greenskin roster would add a ton of utility. A mobile artillery piece, yes please. So, with their large fleshy mouths and boundless energy, colossal squigs unleash untold havoc in battle. These insatiable fungoid beasts messily devour swaths of foes in an instant, squashing everything in their path as they careen towards their next meal. So basically, these guys would be anti-infantry machines, and they would be extremely fast at around somewhere like 90 speed, but they'd be about like the size of between a brood horror and a feral carnosaur, which are two units that are very comparable, but also acts like the Jabber Scythe as it bounces around, and because of its Puff Spores ability. So the Puff Spores ability, when the colossal squig is threatened, its tiny fungal blisters begin to burst, spreading thick clouds of spores that blind and choke any who venture too close. Now, this could work very similarly to the Jabber Scythe spurting bile blood, which basically acts as a mortis engine, or it could give the blinded effect to any melee combatants within range. Then the other big rule is the fungoid squig explosion. When these massive creatures meet their death, their body ripples with a buildup of fungal spore gas, and with an ear-splitting pop, they burst into a mass of smaller squigs. So I see that as like, it would basically be, so when they die, kind of like how the Flames Fire's Phoenix has his death ability, So would the Colossal Squig, but this one, you wouldn't be coming back from. There wouldn't be any of that. It would just mean that you basically do a Super Squig explosion, but probably twice as powerful. The Super Squig explosion is already pretty powerful, so maybe it doesn't do more radius per se, but does more armor piercing. So basically any infantry caught within the radius of this explosion is going to be dead. Then for its other abilities, Crazed Charge can just be explained by having, again, the high charge bonus, and Swallowed Whole just for high melee attack, high weapon strength, and anti-infantry. But yeah, I think this guy would be an absolute nightmare, especially for like mages on foot. Mages on foot, if there's a Colossal Squig on the battlefield, you're probably not making it out of there alive. Now, for all three of these squigs, there may be two variants. So for the Mangler and Colossal Squig, there may be an unarmored and an armored version a tier higher. And then for the Squig Gobba, there could be a single entity variant and then also a multi-entity variant. Let's say 30 entities, or maybe less. You know, maybe it's more monstrous cavalry like sized at like 16 entities. Another subrace of Greenskin that doesn't have its full representation, besides squigs, is the snotlings. So we already have the pump wagons, but we don't have the actual ground unit. It wouldn't actually be an infantry unit per se, it would be a swarm unit similar to the Nurglings. It would probably be another tier 0 unit that would just act as a tar pit, but the thing that would make them different is their Explode in Spores rule. So in tabletop, they could make a single shooting attack in its shooting phase, and as a stand and shoot reaction. And Explode in Spore is a throwing weapon, hitting automatically with no armor saves allowed. So meaning, this would probably act as a precursor weapon with 2 ammunition, but armor-piercing explosions. So this might become the best new tier 0 unit because of that. It would have this precursor weapon that would basically act like a miner's charge, but maybe with less armor piercing or explosion damage and a little bit of poison damage. Then we already have goblins with spear and shield, but we are missing the sword and shield variant, which would be the same unit. It would just have a little better melee stats and a little less or no anti-large. Then armored goblins, also some mods have called them hill goblins, though hill goblins I think are technically just another name for hobgoblins. Armored goblins, though, would just be a unit variant basically of the goblin big boss. You know, that definitely exists, so I don't see why we can't just have one, maybe, unit of goblins, of the regular subrace of goblins, that is a little more elite. And, you know, elite, quotation marks, not really, like, mid-tier at best. Really, they would have similar stats as goblins, maybe a little better melee stats, a little more weapon strength. Mostly, it's just a substantial buff in armor. You know, maybe it goes up to somewhere between 60 to 80 armor, or maybe more. For the Night Goblins, we're missing the Spear variant. Yeah, just gives us an anti-large variant of the Night Goblins. They definitely exist. Night Goblin Netters, really, maybe all Night Goblin units just get a net ability, or you get a Night Goblin Netters unit that has a net ability. Either or. War Machine, so the Goblin Spear Chucker is a big missing unit. It's basically like the Dwarven Bolt Thrower that exists in the game now. It's definitely a tier 1 artillery, not very good, but, you know, helps you, it's a little bit of utility. Maybe you can pull the enemy in if they are trying to defend somewhere. You know, make them move. Now, I didn't cover Snitget the Black Gobbo. He's a Night Goblin war boss who's a Lord choice from the White Dwarf magazine. Now, he could be a cool character, kind of like Gotrek and Felix, that just kind of shows up in your Greenskin campaigns. could be a cool choice for the game. Now, the reason I'm mentioning him is because he gets a mount option that he was the inventor of, called the Speshul Destroya. So the Speshul Destroya kind of would act like the Skullcracker Iron Demon. Now, the image you see on screen, I actually have a mod on for the Skullcracker. CA, if you're watching, the Skullcracker is a massively underwhelming unit, probably the worst one in the Chaos Dwarf roster right now. Why it does not have armor sundering attacks or more weapon strength than the Iron Demon is beyond me. There really isn't much of a reason to bring the Skullcracker right now. Besides, I think it has Wallbreaker and Vanilla. Now, for the Speshul Destroya's rules, we had Swinging Death, which basically gives it, a similar animation style to what the Skullcracker does. The Dwarf's Away means it has a Doom Diver also on it, so that's why it is kind of like a Skullcracker meets an Iron Demon with a Doom Diver on it. I also compared the Speshul Destroya with the Spiky Roller, but I didn't want to clutter the screen with too many stat cards. Yeah, I think it would be a really interesting unit. Now, the only character that mounts this is the Black Gobbo, so we might not see this unit added unless the Black Gobbo is in the game. I think the Black Gobbo is a very cool character, but by no means is he at the top of my list as far as missing greenskin characters. The Dung Flinga. I don't think this was ever in tabletop, but we've seen it in mods, and it makes so much sense and is so thematic. If the greenskins can leave behind giant piles of poo in enemy settlements, I think they can also fling their dung, like in catapults. So basically, like I talked about with the Web Flinger in the Forest Goblin video, this would have less damage than the Rock Globber, would have similar, but maybe not the same range, but the added effect of leadership debuff, because you're literally throwing shit at your enemies. I think that would be super thematic for the Greenskins roster to have. Feral Beasts. So there are a number of Feral Beasts that already exist in the game that I kind of just feel should be part of the Greenskin roster. Like giant wolves recruited at tier 1 below the mounted variant. Giant spiders and spider hatchlings at tier 0 I talked about last video. Feral boars. Again, just a feral version of what we already have mounted. And the Feral Wyvern. Now, the Feral Wyvern exists as a WA unit, and they probably won't change that, but I really think they should just be recruitable anyways, as like a tier 4, tier 3 unit. And then a Squig Herd. Again, just give us the unmounted variant at a tier below, because why not? Other Squig Herders. So, they haven't added any version of Tamers or Herders or any of that into the game, and I don't know that they ever will. But it could be an interesting unit, and if you made it kind of like the Eshin Triads, but maybe they have the Guardian ability, but it only applies to Squigs, any of the Squig units, so, Squig Hoppers, Mangler Squig, Squig Gobba, Colossal Squig, or any character also mounted on a Squig, or Skarsnik, or maybe Skarsnik and any Night Goblin War Boss, or Shaman, Lord or Hero, whatever, would have a Squig Herder skill in their skill line, which gives them the Guardian ability to any Squigs. Maybe it could work like that instead. Just thinking. So for the missing units of Orcs, again, it's largely weapon variants. For the standard low-tier Orc boys, we could have Stickas, which is just another name for spears. It gives us an anti-large option. Big Choppa, so just two-handed weapon, two-handed axe, does more armor-piercing damage and weapon strength. And then maybe a dual Choppa version, so two-hand weapons, more anti-infantry based. For Savage Orcs, for the Savage Orcs themselves, they could also get Stickas, so a spear version. Their Biggins could get a clubs version, so just like a Big Choppa version, a more anti-piercing variant. Perhaps. Savage Orc Biggin archers So in tabletop, Biggins could take bows as an option. They could take it as a weapon. So I think if the Orc Biggins could, Savage Orc Biggins can too. Maybe it gives a little more range, a little more missile strength. For the Biggins, maybe it gives a little more armor. Beyond just the Savage Orcs themselves, for their roster, they could get a little bolster from having a Savage Giant, which is just another giant, but this is like the same Greenskin giant, but it has more physical resistance, and a reskin at that. And then the Big Stabbas would act like a weapons team, most similar to the Warp Grinders of the Skaven. I don't think it could have as powerful as abilities, but maybe it has one ability that's a bit lesser. They would just have a lot of armor piercing and anti-large. They might have the wall breaker trait, which is the big part, I think, that would make them something worth bringing in. If they have the wall breaker trait, and then maybe they have an ability that just lowers melee stats for nearby enemy infantry, maybe. For Orc Biggins, variants such as dual weapons, great weapons, shields, and archers all make great sense and would add a lot more variety to that tier of infantry. Black Orcs in tabletop were the only orcs that had the arm to the teeth rule, which means they could cycle between different weapons in battle. So in Total War, in the pre-deployment battles campaign screen, maybe there could be a mechanic where you can do this. Maybe you could do this for all orcs, or goblins even. People have asked for this mechanic. It would be great to see it. I don't know if it's going to happen. I think it could be very similar to the Warriors of Chaos implementation, where you can switch the unit variant. I think adding that to Greenskins would be great. But anywho, Black Orcs, shields, stickers, or maybe they're like more of a halberd than a spear, dual weapons, and I think if the Black Orc Big Boss can be mounted on a boar, why can't we get a Black Orc Boar Boy unit? I talked in my last video of Ironclaw Boar Boys being a monstrous cavalry-sized boar unit for Gorbad's faction specifically, but if we could get Black Orc Boar Boys for the entire Greenskin roster, basically just a better version of the Biggin Boar Boys, I think that would be amazing. Wyvern Riders are certainly loreful. Usually we would just see it as a character mount or a feral version, but again, as I said, we have seen over a dozen mods within Total War Warhammer's life cycle that have added Wyvern Riders, whether it be a regular orc riding it, a savage orc, or a black orc. We've seen it all. We've seen all of that added in mods, so there's definitely a demand there. Now, do I think add this to the entire Greenskin roster? No. But I do think it would be very cool as a kind of specific unit for maybe Gorfang Rotgut or Azag the Slaughterer that very much acts like the Knights of Torgaval, meaning you'd only be able to get one per settlement at tier 5. So you'd only be able to have one for any province. I think that would be an awesome add for especially Gorfang. I think it would probably fit best. Now, Big Gork is interesting. Added from White Dwarf, it was a huge siege engine built to breach the walls of Wolfenburg. It was part of the huge horde gathered by Grimgor Ironhide to attack the city and proved nearly impossible to damage or even slow as it approached. Is this necessary to add to Total War? I don't think so. But would it be cool? Hell yeah. It would basically probably be a slow-moving, very tanky... Basically, you're just either supposed to throw it into a blob. Again, it's another like the Special Destroya unit. It's kind of out there, but it could act as something like a Skullcracker. Now, obviously, the Big Gork would be like a giant Skullcracker, like a literally giant-sized. You know, it's in tabletop. We've even seen that the Big Gork is specifically actually bigger than giants. So this thing would be huge. And it would be absolutely have the wall breaker rule. It would just destroy walls, gates, or any blockade within a settlement. So that should be about everything I wanted to cover with this series. But before we go, I'd like to kind of all wrap it up in a bow. So again, I think it is very, very likely, I am willing to bet, you know, that if we were to get all fill out the 8 slots for legendary lords for Greenskins, which I personally think will happen, it's extremely likely that those 3 characters will be, first and foremost, Snagla Growlspit, second, Gorfang Rockgut, and then the third one I'm not as sure about, but again, I've seen several polls in the forums with over 100 votes each at this point, and the 3 main contenders are easily outperforming any other possible greenskin characters like the Black Gobbo or Morglum Neck Snapper or Grumluck and Gazbag or the Sour Belly guy or Git Guzzler, any of those guys. Those guys get very few votes. Gorbad, on the other hand, was very clearly the 3rd candidate. And as far as who got unique rules and models in tabletop, again, Snagla, Gorfang, and Gorbad easily make the most sense. I've already pretty extensively talked about the start positions I think everybody would end up in my other videos, but quick overview, I think Warzag needs to move south. He just needs to make room for Gorbad and Gorfang and any other greenskin character that might come. I think it's loreful. It's a loreful start position. That's where he starts. That's where he was born, and then he went up to the Badlands and became more famous up there. But maybe Gorfang could move into Ekron, because I do think that's a great start position. And then maybe one of his first missions is just to go take the Black Crag and become the Squatter King of Black Crag. Otherwise, he would start in Black Crag. Grom, Skarsnik, Grimgor, Azhag, I think their start positions are great. Leave them where they are. And then, again, Gorbad, I think a dual start position over in the east helps explain him into the game, since he's been not seen in the old world for hundreds of years. But then also having a dual start position, maybe with Morglum Neck Snapper as a pseudo-legendary lord in Iron Rock, since that otherwise would be Gorbad's loreful start position from his lore. And then Snagla, we have at least one mention of the Forest Goblins in Koresh, so having that eastern start over there to help fight, to have us fight against the Snake Men would be really cool. But obviously, I think Black Pit would be the best place for a Forest Goblin faction, but maybe Snagla can have that dual start and have Tinnet Four Eyes start in the Black Pit on his Black Bigness Arachnarok Spider. Now, finally, here's a visual that just lays out all the legendary characters for the Greenskins that I would love to have in the game if I were to have it my way. I don't expect all of these, but again, I baseline think we're going to get Gorfang, Gorbad, and Snagla as legendary lords, and Gatilla the Hunter as a legendary hero. I think we would love to see Borgut Facebeater as a legendary hero that Grimgor starts with. Basically just a Black Orc Big Boss legendary version. Graka Gorax is technically more of a lord than a legendary hero, who fights in the Drakwold Forest against Chaos. But I think just to get him in the game, why not just make him a legendary hero for Warzag that kind of gives those same buffs for fighting Chaos, and just gives you a melee guy to start with, a melee legendary character. Then Gatilla could start with Gorbad's army. I have it switched around here. Zargak should be on top. Gatilla could be a legendary hero that starts with Gorbad, but I think it would be much better if he was almost a replica of Gorda's Backstabber, but instead of buffing Hobgoblin units, obviously, he buffs Goblin units for the Greenskins. And instead of being a melee assassin, he's more focused on being a ranged assassin. So kind of like something like a Marcus Wolfheart meets Gorda's Backstabber. So kind of sort of in between that as far as how he works on the battlefield. Zargak the Mad is just Gorfang's orc shaman hero guy. A worthwhile character, but out of all the characters on this list, probably the least likely and least important. So, and then Tinnet Four Eyes. Again, I think he could make for a great pseudo-legendary lord for Snagla, so they could do that dual start. I think that would be really, really nice. But if they didn't do that, I think I would just like to see Tinnet Four Eyes in the game somehow, so legendary hero could work just as well. Now, Rachnik Spiderclaw and Oglok the Horrible are pseudo-legendary lords that come from the tech tree that exist in the game. I think Rachnik should get maybe a little more of a forest goblin reskin. Oglok maybe needs a little touch-up. Morglum Neck Snapper, as I mentioned, could work as a great Confederation mission for Gorfang Rockgut for the early game, or possibly a pseudo-legendary lord for Gorbad or Ironclaw for a dual start position. And then finally, Grumlock and Gazbag are really cool. So Grumlock is a black orc war boss, so a lord level character, and Gazbag just rides on his shoulder and he's a night goblin shaman. So they're one entity, but you know, a very good hybrid entity. So both very good at being a melee combatant and pretty darn good at being a mage as well. I think putting Grumlock and Gazbag as the third tech tree lord with Rachnik and Oglok, but instead he branches off from the middle tree. So if you go up the top, you get to Rachnik. If you go down below, you get to Oglok. If you go down the middle, you get to Grumlock and Gazbag. And again, he would take, 5,000 gold to unlock. And maybe he gets a chariot mount or something, but otherwise would just be a foot character. And that's all, folks. So the Greenskin series is now complete. Now I'm going to get back to working on Norska, because I really think that's very imminent. So we're working on that. I already did a bunch of work on it, but then I shifted gears to go work on Greenskins and Dwarves, but now I don't have enough time to do the Dwarves. I have to get back to Norskins, so... Anywho, please like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.